Hello and welcome to Carolina Update. As you may know, Carolina Update is a program which we dedicate to the public interest, and we try to address ourselves to issues which affect us and our community. I'm Mike Hyatt. With me is Bill Sharp from Channel 5 News. Our special guest today is Mr. Charles E. Smith, who is with the American Opinion Speakers Bureau. And before we get started in the program, Mr. Smith, I of course would like to welcome you to Charleston. It's nice to have you here. Would you tell us, please, sir, the American Opinion Speakers Bureau, does that signify some sort of political affiliation?
No, it does not. It's an educational organization. It's the Speakers Bureau of the John Birch Society, whereby we invite the public to come out to meetings and explain our viewpoint. It's an educational organization. I'm a lecturer with it.
Oh, I see. So you actually go around the country espousing the John Birch theories about whatever.
Well, not John Birch theories. We simply tell the American people the truth, and truth is never a theory. For example, the truth about the Panama Canal and the Canal Zone is that the canal and canal zone were and are unincorporated American territories, and every court decision ever made pertaining to the canal says that those things were ours. When Jimmy Carter gets on the air and says we never owned the canal, we're just leasing the space, etc., Jimmy Carter was telling a lie to the American people. Just because Carter and his associates are high officials is no reason that we should sit back and say he's the president, he must be right. I had copies of all the court decisions. Carter was lying. So it's not a theory I'm espousing. I simply tell the truth, that Carter was involved in treason.
Well, now, the truth, as you see it, Mr. Smith, I'm not sure that any of us here are capable of knowing exactly what the truth is objectively, are we? I mean, I can say what I perceive to be the truth is the truth, and you can say, well, Bill, I don't quite see it that way. This is the way I perceive the truth. Can you definitively sit here and tell me that so-and-so is the truth without saying, as I see it?
I certainly can do that, and the reason I can do it is that with respect to the Panama Canal that I referred to, which brought this question up, Jimmy Carter said that Supreme Court decisions would back him up on his assertion that the Panama Canal was not owned by the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I've got every canal decision, or I had them, and I used to have them in a briefcase, and every decision made by the court said it was our canal and our territory. Now that is the truth. It's not a theory. That is objective reality.
Isn't that sort of a moot point at this time, though? I mean, the
No.
canal has virtually been given now to the Panamanians, has it not?
No, it hasn't been given. Carter and his associates signed a treaty, but the implementation of the treaty is left up to the House. The treaty requires some billions of dollars that we should pay this Marxist agitator down there, Torrijos, to take the canal from us.
Mm-hmm.
If the House won't put in the money, the treaty is dead. It's not a dead issue at all. If we get our congressmen to vote to cut off the money, Carter's giveaway program will not take place.
What do you think about big government in general? What do you think about government in general?
Well, I think government is a necessary evil. I think about government the way George Washington did. He said government is not eloquence, it is not reason, it is force. Like fire, it's a dangerous servant and a fearful master. And right now, government has ceased to be the servant of the people. It is becoming the master of the people. And the bigger the government, the more dangerous, the more fearful the master.
Mr. Smith, if you will allow me a little license here to expand, and I can't do this except come right out and say this, and if you'll bear with me, I will go ahead and say it. Government benefits a large number of black people, particularly in the South. And here you sit across from this table and you're against government. How do you manage to do that when you yourself are black?
Well, I'm a taxpayer. I don't see myself as being a so-called black. I've never done anything on the basis of race. I work for a living. I earn some money. It's mine. I'm entitled to keep it. And you're entitled to the same thing. Now, all these so-called government programs are what they call income transfer programs. You understand that language?
I understand the language, but what I fail to understand is how you, whether you're black, white, green, blue, or brown, can say, these poor people, that's tough, but I make my money and I'm going to keep it. I mean, is there not compassion within the John Birch Society?
There's compassion within individuals, within all individuals, but I'm paying so much taxes that my compassion has run out. You can tax a person out of his compassion. But the income transfer deal means that I earn the income and the government transfers it to someone else. Look, if a guy caught you in an alley and stuck a gun in your back and took your money, that'd be called robbery. If he hires somebody to take your money and give it to him, it's still robbery, but the government calls it welfare. And I simply am against the government, the federal government, stealing my tax money, which I've worked for, stealing my money and getting it to somebody else. Now, I'm not against helping somebody. If you want to put in welfare at the local level, you can do it. Or at the state level, you can do it. But the federal government is not supposed to be involved. Now, let me just say this, that as far as I'm concerned, if you're going to have welfare at the local level, the purpose of welfare should be to get a person back on his or her feet. So if you see a man lying on the ground, your job is to help that man to his feet. Get him a bath, a shower, a meal, or whatever he has to have so that he can become productive again. What the liberals are doing is they see a guy lying in the gutter, and they rush up to him with a waterbed, some pillows, some blankets, a television set, and meals in bed to make him comfortable where he is. And the net result of that is they are producing a great group of people who have no desire to work and who are being taught that somehow they're entitled to a living. They're entitled to food stamps, etc. Well, that's not welfare. That is the domestication of the individuals. It turns people into herd animals, and that hurts Americans. That hurts all Americans. And since you mentioned about this black business, you can see the disastrous results in the Negro community. It brings about disaster. You produce people with no desire to work after 10 years of this business.
Well, since I don't like to refer to it as black business, but I refer to that because it is a problem that exists, particularly in the South, and I'm sure in the ghettos of the North. But here in the South, we have a large poor, in quotes, if you will, a large poor population that is black. We also have some poor white people. This is a poor section of the country in comparison with some of the more affluent areas. I believe you live in California, which
Santa
is
Barbara.
Santa Barbara, which is a very nice place,
Yes,
highway
sure
and all
is.
that. But what happens to some person who has 4 or 5 fatherless children? She obviously cannot take care of the children. She obviously does not have any income. If she were to go to work, she would not make enough money because of her educational limitations to provide adequate basic health care needs for these illegitimate or at least fatherless children. Now, this is a situation that does exist, and I know that there are many people in this audience who will say, he's right, talking about you, because welfare is doing an injustice to our people, and I am taxed too much for this, and something else is wrong here and there, and they will go on. But the fact is, from a humanistic standpoint, what do? You say we do it on a state level. Well, if the state level is not enough, if it's not sufficient enough, then you can't just give a 3-year-old kid who's barefooted a shower and a meal.
Wait. All right, see, look. First of all children have fathers. All of them.
They're not all in the home.
Well, all children have fathers. Now, what I would do, if I had to adopt a program to reduce the number of people on welfare, this is really what we're talking about. You can't keep putting more people on welfare and taxing me more for that sort of thing. If I had to put in a program to reduce welfare, what I would say essentially to these women, white or black, doesn't matter to me, I would say, all right, we'll let you make one mistake. Now, a teenage girl goes out and gets pregnant and has a baby. All right, I would say, if necessary, we'll support that child for, let's say, 5 years. And we'll give you training. She can train for what she wants, the mother. And she has to go out and get a job and support that child. Now, I see no reason why we should let a woman have one child, put her on welfare, and then she gets a second child, and then a third child, and then a fourth child, and then a fifth child. No, I'd cut that nonsense out. You see, my patience runs out when somebody repeats the same mistake again and again and again. I just feel it's not a mistake at all. It's deliberate. So I'm in favor of helping somebody, but that person had better be willing to help themselves. And if the person knows they get pregnant a second time, and I'm going to give them more money, what is the incentive to not get pregnant again? If you want to have children, go out and get married, find a husband, and go on and have your children and raise a family. That's the proper way to do it. That's the moral way to do it. Now, as far as helping people, that's charity. If we vote a tax on ourselves at the local levels to help people, that is because we are charitable. If we vote in the state tax, it's because we're charitable. Now, no one can force us to do it. If I don't want to help somebody, that's my business. I may want to help someone, but that too is my decision to make. We'll vote on it. We'll do what we want to do. But when these characters in Washington, D.C. are telling us that we must help somebody, and they're forcing us to do it at the point of a gun through this taxation system, that's just highway robbery. And by doing that sort of thing, the government is able to get the poor people and the people receiving these benefits to outvote those who pay the taxes. And pretty soon a tax issue comes up, and some liberal runs for office and promises, I'm going to give you more. And I say, hey, wait a minute, you're taking more of my tax money. Then when we vote, for every person you have working, you got 2 or 3 welfare people voting, and the liberal gets back in office. So I'm saying that by the government stealing my money, giving it to people, they are buying votes and perpetuating the power of liberals in government. And we've got to break that sort of cycle.
Okay, we'll break the cycle right here, take a break for 90 seconds, and we'll be right back with Mr. Charles E. Smith. Our guest today is Mr. Charles E. Smith, who is with the American Opinion Speakers Bureau. And Bill, when we broke away, I believe you said you had a question you'd like to open with.
Mr. Smith, it's interesting to hear your views. I haven't heard views of this nature expressed in a while, and it's good to get this side of the coin expressed. Why do you refer to blacks as Negroes?
Because I believe in tradition. About 15, 20 years ago, I was mixed up with them communists in the Fair Play for Cuba Committee.
Well, now, so was Lee Harvey Oswald, if I'm not mistaken.
Oswald was in Russia at the time training for something.
But he was also, wasn't he, down in, where was he, down in New Orleans?
He came back, went to New Orleans and that sort of business, but he wasn't in the thing while I was in there. He was in Russia.
But that was the same organization.
Same organization, supporting Fidel Castro. And what happened was, and I forgot your question, we have to track here.
The question was, why do you refer to blacks in 1979 as Negroes?
Okay, I'll tell you why that is. I attended meetings with communists, and they were trying to find a way to transfer the allegiance of Negro people from country to race and race to a separate state. Now, your basic loyalties are to God, family, and country. They wanted to misplace the loyalty, and by doing it that way, they could eventually bring about a racial civil war or have Negroes agitating for a so-called separate state. Now, the maneuvers they went through, this was discussed. I was with them communists when they did it. They want to change the name from Negro to Afro-American. That didn't work too well. Then they came up with this business about, well, we got to sever connection with the white man, the Western world. White guys wear suits and get haircuts. We'll stop wearing suits and stop getting haircuts. Africans don't get haircuts. This kind of nonsense. And hence the African dress supposed to be them funny-looking robes, so-called dashikis. They tried that. It didn't work.
That was inspired by the communists?
I was with them when they were planning it. You're darn right.
Okay.
Now, they went from Negro to Afro-American. That didn't work. They went from Afro-American to so-called black nationalists. That didn't work. And they went from black nationalists to so-called black. That's the way they did it. And the net result is that they have produced much more racism, even though it's not recognized, among the Negro people than ever existed before. Now, a racist is a person who makes judgments about race. They develop programs based on those judgments, and then they carry those programs out through the government. That's what Hitler did. And every time you see these so-called black leaders opening their mouths, it's race, 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 and they got to have this program and that program. Now that, my friend, is what the Ku Klux Klan was doing in the South.
Now you say
They
you
made
believe...
assumptions about race, developed programs based on the assumptions, and carried them out through the government. It's racism, no matter who does it.
You believe in tradition, thus the term Negro, but the tradition of the black man in this country has been one of oppression, slavery. Terrible things have happened to the black man in the name of tradition in this country. So if you espouse tradition, you're also espousing these terrible things, are you not?
No, I'm not. I didn't say rigidity. I said tradition. Things change. And changing within the framework of the Constitution is fine with me. In fact, I'll tell you something. Perhaps the modern miracle was that the Negroes were able to survive after the Civil War. Here were several million people with no land, no way of life whatsoever, just cast out all of a sudden. All of a sudden they were free, nothing to do. And I tell you, had it not been for the close bond between the Negroes and the white people in the South, there's no way in the world Negroes could have survived. If America has produced a modern miracle, it has been the survival of the Negro people. Now, if you look at things going upwards in this country, if you wanted to correct the so-called traditional abuses, or if I had the opportunity to do it, what I would do is repeal the due process clause in the 14th Amendment, and I would also repeal that section about the national debt in the 14th Amendment, because the 14th Amendment itself allowed segregation. If you wanted to correct the abuses, you'd repeal that 14th Amendment. The sections, not the section making us citizens, so to speak, but the sections allowing for segregation, that due process business. So I would be in favor of amending the Constitution or deleting those provisions to eliminate the abuses that took place in the South here. So traditionally, we've always been going upwards, striving upwards, and I'm in favor of that striving and struggle. It makes you stronger.
But you do believe that down through history, the black man has been oppressed, or if you want to refer to him as the Negro.
There is no question about that. I'd be a fool to deny it.
When you were coming up, weren't you at times forced to go to the back of the bus, or forced to go to a restroom that said colored only, or forced to drink out of a water fountain that said colored only, or something like that? You grew up in Pittsburgh. Don't tell
I'm
me.
glad you asked that question. I said,
how was it when you grew up? Now, you grew up in the North. Granted,
I said, Pittsburgh, not Vicksburg.
Okay, all right.
In Pittsburgh, I never saw any of that.
You never saw any
I
of
never
that?
saw
Did
any
you
of that.
feel subtle discrimination growing up?
Not until I got out of high school, and I went to get a job. I couldn't get a job, and all my white friends had jobs.
Right.
And I grew up with Poles, Yugoslavs, and a lot of immigrants from Europe. And what puzzled me was how they got those jobs. I used to go over early in the morning, right by the railroad tracks, and I'd get the want ads, and the guy said, these jobs are already filled. And I thought to myself, well, how'd they fill the jobs when the ad just appeared? And then finally, I said, well, the ad just come out. And the guy said, oh, that, you need 2 years experience. So I waited for ads dealing with apprentices. And I'd go over, and they would look and say, you need 2 years experience. So I figured to myself, how can I get 2 years experience if they won't hire me in the first place? So I asked my white friends. I stopped them on the way out of the railroads and asked them how they got the jobs. What happened was that the union had gone down to the American Legion Hall and posted notices that they were hiring. Negroes couldn't go in the American Legion. The only guys who got the jobs were the white guys who were brothers, cousins, twins, relatives of people in the Legion. Didn't make any sense to me until I began to study what was going on. What I discovered was that the very people in those unions who made it impossible for us to get the jobs were sitting on the board of directors of the NAACP and the Urban League. The guys at the head of Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, Meston Machine Company, Westinghouse Electric, those characters, those white people, were sitting on the board of directors of the NAACP and the Urban League. What they were doing was freezing Negroes out of jobs and then setting up an organization so we'd go protest. And the net result of that, in building that so-called NAACP, was to use the Negro people to create socialism in America, these so-called government programs. Well, I saw that. I was the victim of that sort of thing, but I saw through the con game. Our so-called friends, the NAACP is a white organization, it's not a Negro organization. Never had been a Negro organization.
What do you think of the NAACP?
I think the NAACP was formed as a communist front. In fact, I know it was. The NAACP was formed after the communists and their allies crushed Booker T. Washington down here in the South.
Well, you don't
I
think
could get
Dr.
into-
Martin Luther King was part of a communist conspiracy?
NAACP was formed in 1904, before King was ever born.
But he was certainly a big leader with the NAACP, was he?
Oh,
not?
yeah, King was leading a lot of things. I think Martin Luther King, if you study his activities, had one solution for every problem: another government program, another federal agency. That's just more government and higher taxes. You look up today, and everywhere you look, you got some federal bureaucrat running around shouting, Negroes being picked on here, women over here, and this sort of business. Well, I, for one, I'm getting sick of that nonsense. Martin Luther King wasn't the least bit interested in the Negro people. What he was doing was using our grievances, legitimate grievances, to promote government programs. Now, when I was with them communists, my wife came to me one day, and she said, can't you see what they're doing? And I said, what? She said, they got you and your friends in the street making all this trouble. And every time they want to solve the problem which you created, they set up a committee in the government. And they get appointed to the committee. And I began to look up. And there sat them bunch of white liberals like eagles sitting on a carcass. Now, that's what's going on today. They sit up there in Washington, Joe Califano in that crowd, claim to be administering everything, claim to love the people, and they're sitting up there sucking up our tax money and oppressing all the American people.
Mr. Smith, this is very interesting, and I know we're going to be bound by the time limitation here. We're not going to be able to ask you all the questions or touch in all of the areas that we would like to touch in, but you keep referring to them communists and that you were involved with them communists. How is it that you came to be involved with them fellas, and why did you do what you did, and what caused you to have them fall in disfavor with your very piercing intellect?
You might say I got recruited by the New York Times. I didn't know Castro was a communist. I was reading all the right books, all the right material, made available in the newsstands: Harper's, Atlantic Monthly, Time, Newsweek, U.S. News and World Report, New York Times, this sort of business. And they all said Castro wasn't a communist. I listened to them white liberals in Washington, D.C., the Eleanor Roosevelt, Walter Reuther in that crowd. They all said Castro wasn't a communist. How was I supposed to know? I joined this organization thinking it was a good organization,
right,
and found out the thing was completely controlled and dominated by communists. I had simply been lied to.
Do you, by implication, mean that the New York Times and Harper's and the other magazines are also perhaps communist?
Well, I think the record shows from the promotion of Mao Zedong as an agrarian reformer in China, right down to the promotion this year of this Khomeini as some kind of religious person in Iran, the record shows that those magazines and newspapers I've named have lent their editorial columns and their policies to support communism and communists consistently all the time. And that I can prove.
Do you remember when you were growing up, Senator McCarthy?
I remember Senator McCarthy. I remember McCarthy very well. I also remember the Army McCarthy hearings. I've also read Joe McCarthy's books. And I think McCarthy was right in what he was doing. I liked what he was doing, and I liked his methods. And I don't like what happened to McCarthy. And I don't like the American people being consistently lied to, as McCarthy is called some kind of bad man. McCarthy was right. And you look up today, and here you see our president giving away the Panama Canal. Our president taxing us to build truck factories for the communists in Russia. Our president taking our goods and giving it to the communist Chinese. Our president going to welcome Fidel Castro here. Our president is conducting policies now that are openly pro-communist. And they're spending, Jimmy Carter and his buddies are spending all their time building up the communist governments and tearing down everybody else. Tearing down Rhodesia, tearing down South Africa, tearing down Chile, tearing down anybody that's not communist, and steadily building up communism. Now, I say that could not have happened by accident, and Joe McCarthy was right. The men in our State Department who adopted those policies, some of them have died, but most of them are still there. The up-and-coming liberals at the time, the Dean Rusk and the Walt Rostos, the Kissingers in that crowd, they have simply replaced the Atchisons and the Marshalls. The treason is rampant in Washington, D.C. I happen to be in favor of what Joe McCarthy was doing. I think McCarthy made one big mistake. He didn't have an organization. Consequently, in order to stop McCarthy, all I had to do was get him censured, drum him out of the public eye. They could crucify McCarthy. But it's very difficult to kill an organization. That's why I'm a member of the John Birch Society. We don't intend to give up on this thing. We intend to stop these communists.
You were talking with Mike before the program started today, Mr. Smith, about the right to bear arms. Tell us how you feel about that.
Very briefly, my friend, the reason we have to have firearms is to protect ourselves against crime and criminals. And it doesn't matter where the criminal appears, whether he comes as an individual, whether he appears in a group, or whether he appears in the government. The intent of the Founding Fathers was that we should have firearms. We should have the means always to protect our lives and our property, especially against government. In fact, the Founding Fathers began shooting on the day King George came to disarm the American people. Your history tells you that. Paul Revere's ride. The British Army sneaking out of Boston. They were coming to confiscate the firearms. That's what that was about. Fortunately for us, the Founding Fathers weren't liberals. They got up and got their guns. And when the British got to Concord Bridge, you recall, the fight broke out. The shot heard around the world was fired. And that's why we're free. And I suggest to you, if King George III had succeeded in disarming the American people, there wouldn't be a United States. It'd be one of them colonies like Australia or something other. And I say likewise, that if this administration succeeds in confiscating our firearms, we will have nothing to protect us from the government. That is the condition of slaves around the world. The Chinese people got no protection from Deng and then murders over in China. The Cubans got no protection from Castro. The Germans had no protection from Adolf Hitler. And the Christians in Rome had no protection from the Caesars.
How do you feel about Taiwan?
I think Taiwan is being handed over to the communists. I think the policy adopted by our government, which let Red China, which let the communists take China, is also being applied to Taiwan. And I'll state that policy. It was stated by Owen Latimer in a little magazine called The Compass, Sunday Compass. I was too much to explain to you. But what he did, what Latimer said, in explaining the policy toward China, he said the thing to do, the problem, was how to allow China to fall, that is to fall to the communists, without making it seem as if we pushed them. The thing to do, therefore, is to let South Korea fall without making it look as though we pushed them. And what our government's doing right now is they're going to let Taiwan fall without letting it look as though we pushed them. So you're going to have Carter and his buddies, the Howard Bakers and the Robert Byrds, making all kind of noises about supporting Taiwan publicly and privately stabbing it in the back.
That's very interesting, and we're just about out of time.
Wish we had some more time.
Is there anything that you can surmise in summary, about 60 seconds I see we have? What would you do to ease the situation that you're so upset with right now? Is there something that you can describe for us in about a minute?
If I could do something, adopt an attitude, I would force our government to discontinue foreign aid in all of its forms. Within 6 months' time, all the communist governments around the world would collapse, all of them, because they cannot exist without continuous American aid under all different disguises. Internally in this country, what I would do is force them congressmen to balance the budget. If you balance the budget, you'll end inflation. We
Okay.
can solve our problems.
Interesting concept. Next time you come to town, give us a jingle on the phone. We'd like to hear some more of this, Mr. Smith.
Great.
Thank you, and thank you, Bill.
Right, Mike?
And thank you for watching. Join us again next week for Carolina Update.